Following the conclusion of the civil war between the Marians and the Solani, Rome at present only had one enemy remaining. A ruler who had almost unlimited resources and ages of time to prepare for the inevitable escalation in tensions. Mithridates Megas and his Pontic forces, who held hegemony over the Black Sea by now, also owned most of Syria and Mesopotamia. This on their own made them extremely dangerous, but just to further solidify the position, they had allied themselves with the Armenians and together gone to war with the Parthians, a nation even further east than themselves. A nation we will get more acquainted with in the far future. However, enemies don't always fight one another on the battlefield. Sometimes they compete to get the upper hand on the other through various means. Such was the relation between Pompey and Crassus, as both of them were assigned to defeating Mithridates and only one of them had arrived while the other was all the way over in Spain. This war was the perfect opportunity to get the edge over the other. Especially for Crassus, as he was so far behind Pompey in terms of gravitas that they almost couldn't be considered rivals. As Crassus made landfall at Ephesus, he immediately went to action, bolstering his legion while at the same time calling for a meeting with Lucius Licinius Lucullus, the man who had defended the Roman assets in Anatolia during the civil war. Throughout this meeting, all manners of topics were discussed. Crassus, with his administrative expertise, had endless ideas on how to develop the province of Asia, the main source of supplies in this part of the world. He wanted it to overflow with all kinds of nutrition to supply his army for what Crassus deemed most important, namely marching into Syria and swiftly defeating Mithridates and his immense armies. Also, he could end the war before Pompey arrived. Lucullus, however, saw this as a reckless plan without any strategic foresight. Being more familiar with the relations with various nations, client states to Rome, Lucullus preferred to fight alongside their subjects, who at the time was besieging Ankara. This was, in his eyes, a way better spot to establish a supply depot and would act as a perfect base of operations in the heart of the Mithridatic kingdom, from where they would be able to divide and conquer their enemy. The debate went on for quite a while, but it was the news of how Pompey already had passed Mastia in record time that ended the discussion, for Crassus at least. Similarly to how he handled the Numidians, his impatience got the better of him. Lucullus marched for Ankara, while Crassus followed the southern coastline into the Lion's Den, hiring a Greek unit to lead the way in this land that otherwise was completely unknown to the commander and his Italian and African troops. Once Lucullus arrived at Ankara, he was shocked to meet the Bithynians turning home in shame after being repelled at the walls by the Pontic garrison. So instead of launching a dangerous attack, he dug in for a siege. Danger, however, was something Crassus couldn't avoid in order to acquire the gravitas he so desperately desired. So he turned to the Lycians, pledging to aid them against the Cilicians, a Greek city-state friendly towards Mithridates, and marched directly into a battle against numbers twice the size of his own. Deployed in the traditional Roman tactic, he advanced. No doubt the climate must have been an issue of its own for the men Crassus led to battle. Nevertheless, his Numidian cavalry rushed ahead of the army to harass the enemy cavalry away from their own battle line. Except they didn't react in time, getting caught instead. Good thing they're quite capable in combat too. Then the infantry clashed. But as you might have predicted, our modernized army was far superior to the Greeks, who both lagged behind in martial prowess, not to forget the wealth of expertise our legionnaires fielded from the civil war. But he wasn't as quick as Pompey to adapt and act on opportunities throughout the battle. Hence, he and his legion suffered substantial casualties. Instead of fully occupying Tarsus, he simply subjugated the Greeks, letting them administrate their own lands while Crassus kept on the offensive. However, the Pontic forces were far closer than anyone expected. Just a month later, Lycia, one of Rome's client states, got completely wiped out from a combined naval and land assault. A horrendous development considering Crassus' need for replenishments. To make matters worse, an army was approaching from Syria itself to hunt him down, meaning Crassus had to make a move now or suffer the consequences. He sent his veteran north to call for aid from Lucullus, who still was besieging Ankara just to find yet another Pontic army deployed at Massacre. Crassus was completely surrounded with no way to escape without a fight. These were the options available. First of all, Crassus could try to wait it out, hoping Lucullus could save the day. The thing is, Lucullus too probably had to fight his way through to do so. This would take time, something we were out of considering the Mithridatic forces within a matter of days could send all their armies against him. In theory, the Cilicians could assist Crassus in a battle, but considering he recently slaughtered a large quantity of their male population, such a reliance could backfire immensely. Secondly, Crassus could double down and continue his expedition all the way into Syria by engaging the army pursuing him. This, however, would call in the garrison of Antioch, meaning he would fight overwhelming odds. Not to forget, this actually could make the entire situation far worse. A third possibility was to go further north towards Massacre. Crassus would have to face about the same amount of enemies as during option 2, but at the benefit of getting closer to Lucullus and his legion. But the pursuing Pontic army could simply attack the next turn, writing this off the table as well. The only true option was to fall back towards Lycia, where a combination of naval and land infantry stood guard. But the thing is, the town was practically without a garrison, and the army wasn't anywhere near the coastline, meaning, if timed correctly, Crassus could defeat the Pontic army in detail. Marching through the fog, he approached his enemy, who by this point in time had become aware of our presence. They had called for reinforcement from whatever little garrison they stationed inside the port, and were suddenly approaching on our left flank. It was at this moment Crassus decided to fully embody the defeat in detailed tactic, selecting his best units to deal with the garrison, while the remaining troops held off the main army. The garrison itself was easy pickings, but the other contingent fielded pikemen, a unit type that was more than capable at dealing with our infantry. They were all concentrated on our right flank, causing all manners of chaos. It was only by utterly surrounding them from all sides we brought them down. It was the will of Mars that allowed Crassus to prevail in this otherwise terrible situation. After the battle, he brought down the fleet, bought off some pirates to defend the place, and then abandoned it the next month just to return to Pessinus. In principle, this expedition was a great success for Crassus. He defeated countless armies and fought his way out of a dangerous situation. However, the fact that he was unable to properly set foot in Syria, not to forget how Mithridates hasn't even showed up yet, was a huge setback in his ambitions to win the war before Pompey's arrival. He had just crossed the Alps, so there was more than enough time to go, unless you consider how Crassus and his men had to sit back and replenish. Lucullus, on the other hand, succeeded in capturing Ankara and had discovered Crassus's pursuers trying to sneak by his new fortress. Together they brought down this threat and slowly started to mend their past disagreement. Mostly it was because of Crassus, who now began supporting Lucullus in his operations in central Anatolia. Their endeavors were so successful that our spies could report additional Pontic armies marching north. Their overall achievements throughout these past few years hadn't been overlooked by Sulla. As a matter of fact, he decided to reward the two commanders by arranging political marriages, solidifying their bonds to the Solani family. But by the following winter, Pompey completed his voyage across the Aegean and landed at Ephesus. The time was over, and he wouldn't wait around to make a move. You see, as Pompey was already married, he couldn't receive the same honor as the other two. Instead, Pompey was given the honor as tutor of Sulla's own son, who was supposed to learn how to lead men in combat. He was given command of an entire legion of his own, while Pompey held full authority during battle. Pompey and Sulla's heir were targeting Syria. This wasn't just devastating news for Crassus but Lucullus too, who felt Pompey didn't deserve to simply join an offensive halfway through the process and potentially get all the fame for the victory. Thus the two commanders agreed to fight alongside each other and try to lure out Mithridates by attacking his homeland. Another bonus was the fact that it was his son that defended their capital. It was a true show of Roman skill. The cavalry easily dealt with their enemies in the engagement on the flanks, and our deep lines were used to great effect, supporting the edges of our front line to withstand any pressure. There was nothing on the field our men couldn't cut their way through. Amasia was razed to the ground, and along with it, Mithridates' own son. This was a move that shook the balance of power to its core. The Armenians, who until this very moment was at war with us, now called for peace. The situation was so dire for Mithridates that he finally revealed his location. Accompanying his finest warriors, he was encamped near Palmyra, making ready for war. With all the pieces on the board, Pompey marched out, planning to take on the Cilicians, similar to how Crassus did, as they had rebelled and looted Massica. While he was moving around in the south, Crassus captured yet another port. Predictably, it was quite costly on his manpower, so he went back towards Ankara to replenish. This, however, left the port vulnerable to the Pontic fleet. This was a dance that kept him occupied for quite some time. To be precise, Pompey was able to completely destroy the Cilicians and scare away the Pontic army defending Antioch, so he could stroll through their gates before Crassus had dealt with this problem here. Pompey now prepared his army for the inevitable confrontation with Mithridates by hiring elephants into his army. These two events here might seem to be separate from one another, but actually they were far closer tied together than you might expect. The army from Antioch was in reality moving north, taking back their capital and linking up with a massive host from the Caucasus. Crassus had been asking for a challenge this entire time, and now it appears the challenge had found him. Looking for any advantage he could get, Crassus set up near the closest bridge, waiting for the enemy to attack. Once they did, Crassus deployed most of his units along the bridge itself, while only keeping a small contingent of units to guard a nearby riffle. Coincidentally, this was where the Pontic units attacked. Lucullus rushed to their aid, but the infantry was so far away. In order to keep the enemy from crossing, Lucullus ordered one of his cavalry to dismount and hold the line. Eventually, all of the units were gathered around this single choke point, archers firing into the river, and all our infantry was thrown into combat to hold off the Pontic pikemen. It was then our cavalry arrived on the other side. They had crossed the bridge and would now work together to crush their backline and perform countless rear charges. One by one, the enemy units broke off, with our cavalry right on their heels. Crassus and Lucullus had successfully repelled the land army, although they couldn't stop the fleet itself. Instead of making another attack, the two commanders turned their battered armies back to Ankara. It was here Crassus too learned about Mithridates' presence in Syria. Considering Pompey too had suffered heavy casualties during his attack on this port, there was now a race for who could get to the Pontic ruler first. This was a race Pompey wasn't about to lose willingly, taking command of the young Sulla's troops. Crassus was the first to enter the same region as the target, but didn't have the manpower to risk an attack with the garrison able to help out, so he tried to lure out Mithridates again by raiding the land. However, this was in vain, allowing Pompey to catch up. Around the same time, they both attacked Mithridates. Out in the distance, Pompey spotted the man he needed to kill. With Crassus right on his heels, he rode out to end the war just to fall short on the finish line. Instead, he found himself being chased by the Pontic cavalry, only scared away by our own units. They were lured into the range of our javelin men, who easily handled the situation. All eyes were focused on the left flank, where more and more units were approaching. However, this was a ploy by Mithridates, who personally tried to sneak past our army on the other side. He got caught by our cavalry, with both commanders rushing over to claim the kill. In the confusion that followed, Mithridates called for his men to fall back. Crassus thought Mithridates was among those cowards and thus pursued them, just to find out the Pontic ruler had stayed behind. It was one of Pompey's bodyguards who claimed the kill in his honor. Without their precious ruler, Pompey called for his elephants, who trembled through the enemy starting on the right and snowballing all the way through the army to completely obliterate their morale. Pompey, the man who was so late to join this war, would now be the one written into the history books as the victor over their Pontic enemy. He would then arrange the peace terms consisting of them letting go of their many recent conquests, while still keeping control of their Black Sea ports as a client state of Rome. Considering his participation in the battle itself, not to forget all the other armies he had brought down, Crassus felt cheated. He was the true victor that no one would truly recognize as such. This Crassus wouldn't forget.